My name is Serafina. I'm 28, and 3 months ago I discovered my sister had been living a lie that destroyed my entire world. What started as a normal Tuesday morning coffee with my kids turned into the moment I realized everything I believed about my family, my father's death, and my sister's sudden wealth was built on the most devastating betrayal imaginable. The custody papers she served me that afternoon were just the beginning of a nightmare that would expose a $350 million secret that changed everything forever. Before I dive into this family revenge story that'll make your blood boil, tell me where you're watching from. Hit that like button if you're ready for some serious family drama. And don't forget to subscribe, because this tale of betrayal and justice is about to get wild. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens when the truth finally comes out. 6 months earlier, my life looked picture perfect from the outside. I was raising my twin daughters Luna and Nova, both 7 years old, in our modest apartment in Portland. My sister Cordelia had always been the golden child, but after our father died 2 years ago, she'd become insufferably wealthy, seemingly overnight. She claimed she'd made smart investments with her inheritance, while I'd received nothing because Dad supposedly died broke. That Tuesday morning started like any other. The girls were eating cereal when Cordelia knocked on my door dressed in designer clothes that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She had this strange, almost predatory smile that should have been my first warning. "Sarah, we need to talk," she said, brushing past me into my living room like she owned the place. "I've been thinking about Luna and Nova's future, and honestly, I'm concerned about their living situation here." I felt my stomach drop. "What do you mean?" She gestured around my small but clean apartment with obvious disdain. "Look at this place. They're sleeping on bunk beds in a room the size of a closet. I have a mansion in France now with grounds, proper bedrooms, the best schools money can buy. I think it's time they came to live with me." "Absolutely not," I said immediately. "They're my daughters, Cordelia. They're happy here." Her expression shifted to something cold and calculating. "Are they though? When's the last time you could afford to take them anywhere nice? Buy them new clothes that aren't from thrift stores? I can give them everything you can't." The argument escalated quickly. She accused me of being selfish, of holding the girls back because of my pride. I accused her of trying to buy my children. It ended with her storming out, but not before she dropped a bombshell that left me reeling. "You'll be hearing from my lawyer, Sarah. I'm filing for custody. Those girls deserve better than what you can provide, and I'm going to make sure they get it." 3 hours later, a process server appeared at my door with official custody papers. My hands shook as I read through the legal jargon, but the message was clear. Cordelia was seeking full custody of my daughters, claiming I was an unfit mother due to financial instability. That night, after I put the girls to bed, I sat at my kitchen table staring at those papers until my eyes burned. How had my sister, who'd never shown any interest in children, suddenly decided she wanted to raise mine? And where exactly had all this money come from? I'd always accepted her story about smart investments, but thinking about it now, something felt off. Our father, Marcus Whitmore, had been a small-town insurance agent. He'd lived modestly, drove an old Honda, never talked about having significant savings. When he died suddenly of a heart attack, I'd been too grief-stricken to question why Cordelia handled all the estate matters alone. The next morning, I called our father's old lawyer, Samuel Hendricks, who'd supposedly handled the estate. His secretary informed me that Mr. Hendricks had retired and moved to Florida, but she could transfer me to the attorney who'd taken over his files. "I'm sorry, Miss Whitmore," the new lawyer said after I explained why I was calling, "but I don't have any record of handling your father's estate." "Are you sure Samuel Hendricks was involved?" My blood ran cold. "What do you mean? My sister said he handled everything." "I have all of Mr. Hendricks' files here, and there's no Marcus Whitmore listed. Perhaps your sister used a different attorney." I hung up, feeling sick to my stomach. If Samuel Hendricks hadn't handled Dad's estate, then who had? And why would Cordelia lie about something like that? That afternoon, I drove to the county courthouse and requested copies of my father's probate records. What I discovered made my hands shake so violently I nearly dropped the papers. There were no probate records for Marcus Whitmore. According to the courthouse, my father's estate had never gone through probate. There was no will on file, no documentation of any kind. It was as if he'd simply vanished from the legal system the moment he died. I spent the rest of the week digging deeper, making phone calls, requesting records from anyone who might have information. What I found was a pattern of lies and misdirection that all led back to my sister. The funeral home confirmed that Cordelia had handled all arrangements and paid in cash. The bank where Dad supposedly had his accounts had no record of him as a customer. Even his insurance company, where he'd worked for 15 years, had no record of any life insurance policy or retirement account. It was like Cordelia had systematically erased every trace of our father's financial existence, and I was starting to understand why. The breakthrough came when I remembered Dad's old safety deposit box. He'd mentioned it once when I was a teenager, saying he kept important papers there just in case. I'd forgotten about it completely until now. At the bank, it took 3 different managers and a copy of my birth certificate, but they finally confirmed that Marcus Whitmore had indeed rented a safety deposit box, and as his daughter, I had legal rights to access it after his death. "Has anyone else accessed this box recently?" I asked the bank manager. She checked her records and frowned. "Yes, actually. A Cordelia Whitmore came in about 18 months ago with a death certificate and power of attorney documents." She cleared out the entire contents. My sister had beaten me there by 6 months, taking whatever Dad had hidden away before I even knew to look for it. But banks keep records of everything, and what the manager showed me next changed everything. She had to sign for the contents when she removed them, the manager explained, showing me a detailed inventory list. Let's see. There were stock certificates, property deeds, and several legal documents, including what appears to be a will. A will. My father had left a will, and Cordelia had taken it without telling me it existed. That night, I realized I wasn't just fighting for custody of my daughters. I was fighting against a sister who had stolen my inheritance, lied about our father's death, and was now trying to use the money she'd stolen from me to take my children away. The war had begun, but I was finally ready to fight back. The rage that consumed me after discovering Cordelia's theft was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. But rage without strategy is just destruction, and I needed to be smarter than my sister if I was going to win this war. I took a week off work, using my limited vacation days to plan my counterattack with military precision. My first move was hiring Patricia Goldman, a private investigator who specialized in financial crimes. Patricia was a former FBI agent with steel gray hair and the kind of no-nonsense attitude that made me feel like I finally had someone in my corner who could match Cordelia's ruthlessness. "Your sister made a classic mistake," Patricia explained during our first meeting in her cramped downtown office. "She assumed you'd never look into your father's finances because you were too trusting, too grief-stricken, too overwhelmed with being a single mother. But criminals always leave trails, especially when they think they're smarter than everyone else." Patricia's investigation began with tracking down every bank, investment firm, and financial institution in the state. Within 48 hours, she'd uncovered what Cordelia had been so desperate to hide: our father hadn't been a simple insurance agent living paycheck to paycheck. He'd been Marcus Whitmore, silent partner in Whitmore and Associates Investment Group, a firm that had quietly managed portfolios worth hundreds of millions. "Your father was what we call a stealth millionaire," Patricia explained, showing me documents she'd obtained through her network of contacts. "He lived modestly by choice, but he'd been building this investment empire for 30 years. When he died, the company was worth approximately $350 million. $350 million. The number was so large it felt abstract, like play money in a board game. But what made it real was understanding what it meant for my daughter's future, and what my sister had stolen from all of us. The will Patricia eventually tracked down through a network of estate attorneys was even more damning than I'd hoped. Dad had left everything split equally between Cordelia and me, with specific provisions for his granddaughter's education and future. He'd also included a letter explaining his decision to live modestly and his hopes that his wealth would be used responsibly by his family. But the most devastating evidence was what Patricia discovered about Cordelia's activities immediately after Dad's death. She'd used forged power of attorney documents to access his accounts, transferred millions to offshore holdings, and then systematically destroyed any paper trail that could connect her to the theft. "She's been living off your inheritance for 2 years," Patricia said bluntly. "The house in France, the designer clothes, the lawyers she's hired to take your kids, it's all your money, Sarah. She's funding her custody battle with wealth she stole from you." Armed with this knowledge, I knew I needed legal representation that could match Cordelia's expensive attorneys. Patricia recommended David Chen, a litigation specialist who'd made his reputation taking down white-collar criminals in high-stakes inheritance disputes. David was younger than I'd expected, probably in his early 30s, but he had the kind of sharp intelligence that made me understand immediately why Patricia had recommended him. When I showed him the evidence we'd gathered, his usually calm demeanor shifted to something predatory. "This isn't just theft," he said, studying the forged documents. "This is fraud on a massive scale. Your sister has committed multiple felonies, and she's been using the proceeds to fund a custody battle against you. We're not just going to defend against her lawsuit, we're going to destroy her completely." While David began preparing our legal counterattack, I focused on the more personal aspects of my strategy. I needed to understand Cordelia's weaknesses, her pressure points, the things that would make her panic and potentially make mistakes. I started by reaching out to people who'd known our family growing up. Our cousin Michael, who'd always been closer to me than to Cordelia, revealed information that added crucial context to my sister's behavior. "Cordelia always resented that your dad seemed to favor you," Michael told me over coffee. "She used to complain that he spent more time helping you with homework, that he was prouder of your achievements. I think she saw his death as her chance to finally win against you." This insight helped me understand that Cordelia's theft wasn't just about money. It was about proving she was the better daughter, the one who deserved their father's legacy. She'd convinced herself that she was entitled to everything because she'd never felt truly loved by Dad. But understanding her motivations also revealed her greatest vulnerability, her desperate need for social approval and status. Cordelia's entire identity was now built on being wealthy, successful, and superior to everyone around her. If I could threaten that public image, she'd be forced to make emotional rather than strategic decisions. I began documenting everything. Every expensive purchase she made. Every social media post showing off her lavish lifestyle. Every public appearance where she presented herself as a successful businesswoman. I was building a case not just for the courts, but for the court of public opinion. Meanwhile, I had to maintain normalcy for Luna and Nova while preparing for the legal battle ahead. I explained to them in age-appropriate terms that Aunt Cordelia wanted them to come live with her in France, but that Mommy was working with lawyers to make sure they could stay together as a family. "Will we have to go away?" Luna asked one night, crawling into my bed during a thunderstorm. "Not if I can help it, sweetheart," I promised, holding both girls close. "Mommy is fighting very hard to keep our family together." What I didn't tell them was that I was fighting with weapons Cordelia didn't even know I possessed yet. The element of surprise was crucial. She needed to believe she was still in control, still the smartest person in the room, right up until the moment I revealed everything. The custody hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks away, which gave us just enough time to prepare our nuclear option. David was filing countersuits for theft, fraud, and attempted kidnapping, while Patricia continued gathering evidence of Cordelia's offshore accounts and hidden assets. But the most important part of my strategy was patience. Cordelia expected me to fight back emotionally, desperately, like a cornered animal. Instead, I was going to be calculating, methodical, and absolutely ruthless. She'd stolen my inheritance and was trying to steal my children, but she was about to learn that underestimating me was the biggest mistake she'd ever made. The month leading up to the custody hearing became a chess game where every move mattered, and I was finally learning to think several steps ahead. But Cordelia wasn't sitting idle either. She was escalating her campaign to paint me as an unfit mother with a viciousness that caught me off guard. It started with unexpected visits from Child Protective Services. A caseworker named Janet Morrison appeared at my door on a Thursday morning, explaining that they'd received anonymous reports about neglect and unsafe living conditions. "This is ridiculous," I said, inviting her in because I had nothing to hide. "My daughters are healthy, happy, and well cared for." Janet was thorough but fair, checking the apartment, interviewing the girls separately, and reviewing their school records. She found nothing concerning, but the fact that someone had made false reports felt like a warning shot across my bow. "Between you and me," Janet said quietly as she was leaving, "whoever called this in provided very specific details about your daily routine, like they'd been watching you for weeks. Be careful, Miss Whitmore. The surveillance explained a lot. How Cordelia knew exactly when I was struggling financially, when I'd had to work late, when I'd looked tired picking up the girls from school. She'd been building her case against me, methodically gathering ammunition for her custody fight. But two could play that game." David Chen recommended a security consultant who installed discrete cameras around my apartment building and helped me document my own daily routines to counter any future allegations. If Cordelia wanted to watch me, I'd make sure I had evidence of her watching. The real breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Mrs. Eleanor Vasquez, the elderly woman who lived in the apartment below mine. She knocked on my door one evening with a concerned expression and a manila envelope in her hands. "Mija, I don't usually get involved in other people's business," she said in her accented English, "but someone has been asking questions about you and your little girls. Very inappropriate questions." She handed me the envelope, which contained photographs someone had taken of me and the girls coming and going from our building. They were clearly surveillance photos, grainy, taken from a distance with timestamps and notes written in the margins. "A man in an expensive suit came to my door last week," Mrs. Vasquez continued. "He said he was a private investigator working for your sister, and he wanted to know if I'd ever seen you drinking, bringing men home, leaving the girls alone. I told him to get lost, but I thought you should know." The photographs were damning evidence of harassment, and David immediately filed a motion with the court documenting Cordelia's surveillance campaign. But more importantly, Mrs. Vasquez had become an unexpected ally who could testify to my character as a mother and neighbor. "That woman," she said, firmly referring to Cordelia, "she doesn't want those children because she loves them. She wants them because she wants to hurt you." I've seen enough family drama in my 70 years to recognize spite when I see it. Patricia Goldman's investigation was also yielding explosive results. She'd tracked down Samuel Hendricks, the retired lawyer who supposedly handled Dad's estate, and his testimony was going to be devastating for Cordelia. "Mr. Hendricks never handled your father's estate," Patricia reported during one of our strategy sessions. "In fact, he doesn't remember your father ever being a client." But here's the interesting part. 3 days after your father's funeral, someone called his office pretending to be a paralegal from another firm, asking for copies of estate documents for Marcus Whitmore. Cordelia was fishing to see if Dad had left a will with Hendricks, I realized. When she found out he hadn't, she knew she could claim there was no will at all. But the most damaging evidence Patricia uncovered was Cordelia's financial trail. She'd been sloppy in her confidence, making transfers that were easy to track once you knew where to look. She moved most of the money through a shell company called Whitmore Holdings, Patricia explained, showing me bank statements and incorporation documents. "She's listed as the sole owner, but the company was created using your father's stolen identity 3 days after he died." The pattern was clear. Cordelia had planned this theft before our father was even buried. While I was grieving and making funeral arrangements, she was systematically stealing everything he'd worked for. David's legal strategy began taking shape around these discoveries. We weren't just defending against a custody suit anymore. We were building a criminal case that would expose Cordelia's crimes to both the courts and the media. "The beauty of her mistake," David explained, "is that she filed for custody using assets she stole from you. Every dollar she spent on lawyers. Every piece of evidence she's presented about her ability to provide for the children. It's all fruit from a poisonous tree." But Cordelia wasn't going down without a fight. As news of our countersuits began circulating through the legal community, she escalated her attacks in ways that made me realize how truly desperate she'd become. She hired a team of private investigators who began contacting my friends, my coworkers, anyone who'd ever known me, trying to find dirt that could be used against me in court. She spread rumors at the girls' school that I was mentally unstable and potentially dangerous. She even had her lawyers send threatening letters to Mrs. Vasquez trying to intimidate her from testifying. The psychological pressure was intense, but it was also revealing. Each desperate move Cordelia made provided more evidence of her true character and her consciousness of guilt. David was documenting everything, building a case that would show not just that she'd stolen my inheritance but that she was willing to destroy lives to cover up her crimes. The most emotionally challenging part was explaining to Luna and Nova why their Aunt Cordelia was trying to take them away from me. They'd overheard enough conversations and seen enough tension to know something serious was happening. Aunt Cordelia says she can buy us ponies if we live with her, Nova mentioned one evening over dinner. But I don't want a pony. I want to stay with you. We're not going anywhere, baby, I assured her, though inside I was terrified that I might not be able to keep that promise. That night, as I tucked both girls into their bunk beds in our small but warm bedroom, I made myself a promise that was more like a sacred vow. Cordelia had taken my father's love, stolen my inheritance, and tried to destroy my reputation. But she would not take my children. The custody hearing was now just 2 weeks away, and we had enough evidence to bury her. But I knew she had one more card to play, and I was preparing for her most desperate move yet. What I didn't expect was how personal and vindictive that final attack would be. The custody hearing was scheduled for a Monday morning in downtown Portland, but Cordelia's final desperate move came the Friday before, and it was more vicious than anything I could have anticipated. She attempted to kidnap my daughters. I was at work when Luna's school called to inform me that someone had tried to pick up both girls, claiming to be their aunt, and insisting there was a family emergency. The school's strict pickup policy and the girls' own protests had prevented the kidnapping, but the attempt left me shaking with rage and terror. The woman became very aggressive when we refused to release the children, Principal Martinez explained when I arrived at the school. She claimed she had legal authority and threatened to call her lawyers. We filed a police report. Luna and Nova clung to me as I drove them home, both confused and scared by what had happened. They couldn't understand why Aunt Cordelia would lie to their teachers, or why she'd seemed so angry when they said they wanted to wait for Mommy. David Chen was furious when I called him. This is kidnapping, attempted child abduction. She's just handed us the case on a silver platter. But Patricia Goldman's analysis was even more strategic. She's panicking because she knows we have her cornered. The attempted kidnapping isn't just a crime. It's proof that she knows she's about to lose everything and was willing to break the law to avoid it. That weekend, while Cordelia was apparently fleeing back to France to avoid the police investigation into the attempted kidnapping, David and Patricia worked around the clock preparing for Monday's hearing. They'd subpoenaed bank records, tracked down witnesses, and assembled a case that would expose every lie Cordelia had told. Monday morning arrived gray and rainy, which felt appropriate for what was about to be the darkest day of my sister's life. The courthouse was imposing, all marble columns and austere hallways that echoed with the sound of expensive shoes on polished floors. Cordelia arrived with a team of 3 lawyers dressed in a designer suit that probably cost more than I made in a month. She looked confident, almost smug, as if the attempted kidnapping had been some minor setback rather than a federal crime. But I noticed the subtle signs of stress. The way she kept checking her phone, the slight tremor in her hands, the forced nature of her smile when she looked at me across the courtroom. Judge Rebecca Morrison was known for her no-nonsense approach to family law cases, and she cut straight to the heart of the matter in her opening remarks. This court has received some very serious allegations in the past 72 hours, she said, looking directly at Cordelia. Before we proceed with the custody matter, I want to address the criminal charges that have been filed. What happened next was like watching a controlled demolition. David methodically presented evidence of Cordelia's theft, starting with the forged power of attorney documents and moving through years of financial fraud with surgical precision. Samuel Hendricks testified via video call from Florida, confirming that he'd never handled our father's estate and that the documents bearing his letterhead were forgeries. Patricia presented bank records showing the systematic transfer of funds from Dad's accounts to Cordelia's shell companies. Expert witnesses explained how Cordelia had used our father's stolen identity to create fake corporations and hide assets offshore. But the most devastating moment came when David played a recording that Patricia had obtained through her investigation. It was a voicemail Cordelia had left for one of her lawyers 2 weeks earlier, and in it she explicitly discussed using Marcus's money to fund the custody battle and how important it was that I never discovered what really happened to the estate. Cordelia's lawyers tried desperately to object, to claim the evidence was circumstantial, to argue that family estate matters were complex and subject to interpretation. But Judge Morrison had heard enough. "Miss Whitmore," she said, addressing Cordelia directly, "you stand accused of multiple felonies including identity theft, fraud, forgery, and attempted kidnapping. Your petition for custody is not only denied, but I'm ordering an immediate restraining order preventing you from having any contact with the minor children involved." The collapse was swift and complete. Cordelia's lawyers abandoned her one by one as the criminal implications became clear. The court bailiff read her Miranda rights as Detective Sarah Kim from the Financial Crimes Unit placed her under arrest. But the most satisfying moment was when Judge Morrison addressed the financial settlement. "The court finds that Miss Serafina Whitmore is the rightful heir to 50% of Marcus Whitmore's estate plus damages for 2 years of theft and emotional distress." The number the judge announced, $175 million plus interest and punitive damages, was so large that it took several seconds for it to register. I was not just getting my inheritance back, I was getting justice. As they led Cordelia away in handcuffs, she finally dropped her composed facade. "You don't understand," she screamed at me, across the courtroom. "Dad always loved you more. Everything was always about perfect Serafina. I deserved that money, and there it was, the truth she'd never been able to admit even to herself. This had never been about the girl's welfare, or smart investments, or any of the lies she'd told. It was about a lifetime of jealousy and resentment that had twisted her into someone capable of stealing from her own family." The 24 hours following Cordelia's arrest felt surreal, like waking up from a nightmare only to discover that the monsters were gone and the sun was shining. But the magnitude of what had happened, what I'd won, what she'd lost, what it meant for my daughter's future, was almost too enormous to process. The media attention was immediate and overwhelming. "Local woman uncovers $350 million family fraud," read the headline in the Portland Tribune. Cable news picked up the story within hours, fascinated by the elements of family betrayal, attempted kidnapping, and massive financial fraud. My phone rang constantly with reporters, distant relatives I hadn't heard from in years, and financial advisors eager to manage my suddenly substantial assets. David Chen's office became command central for managing the chaos while protecting my privacy and my daughter's safety. "The story has everything the media loves," David explained during an emergency meeting at his office. "Family drama, massive money, a clear villain, and a sympathetic victim. We need to be very careful about how we handle this attention." Patricia Goldman had already anticipated the media frenzy and hired a security firm to monitor my apartment building and the girls' school. The last thing I wanted was for Luna and Nova to become targets for photographers, or worse. But the most immediate concern was the criminal investigation into Cordelia's activities. Detective Kim informed me that the FBI was now involved, given the interstate nature of the fraud and the international money transfers. Cordelia's theft was part of a larger pattern they'd been investigating, involving offshore shell companies and financial crimes. "Your sister was slopier than she realized," Detective Kim explained. "Once we started pulling at the threads of her operation, we found connections to other cases, other victims. She's looking at serious federal time." The French authorities had already frozen Cordelia's assets there and were cooperating with the U.S. investigation. Her mansion, the designer clothes, the expensive lawyers, everything was being seized as evidence or proceeds from criminal activity. Within 48 hours of her arrest, Cordelia's entire carefully constructed life had crumbled. The social media accounts where she'd flaunted her wealth were deleted. Her friends and business associates distanced themselves from the scandal. The investment firm she'd claimed to run was exposed as a front for money laundering. But perhaps the most revealing aspect of her downfall was how completely alone she was. No one came to visit her in jail. No one posted bail. The life she'd built with stolen money had been as hollow and fake as the documents she'd forged to steal it. Meanwhile, the legal process of recovering Dad's stolen assets was moving with surprising speed. The court had appointed a special master to oversee the transfer of funds from Cordelia's accounts back to the estate, and David was working with a team of financial experts to trace every dollar she'd stolen. The beauty of digital banking, explained forensic accountant Maria Santos, is that every transaction leaves a trail. Your sister thought she was clever, moving money through multiple accounts, but she actually made it easier for us to prove the scope of her theft. The amount kept growing as they uncovered hidden accounts and traced investment returns. What had started as a theft of Dad's original assets had compounded over 2 years into a massive fortune that was now rightfully mine. But the emotional impact on my daughters was what concerned me most. They'd overheard enough adult conversations to understand that Aunt Cordelia had done something very wrong and was in trouble with the police, but explaining the full scope of her crimes to 7-year-olds was a challenge. Hadn't anticipated. Is Aunt Cordelia a bad person? Nova asked one evening as we sat together in our living room, surrounded by legal documents and financial papers. Aunt Cordelia made some very bad choices, I explained carefully. She took things that didn't belong to her and she tried to hurt our family. People have to face consequences when they do things like that. Luna, always the more perceptive of my twins, asked the question I'd been dreading. Did she try to take us away because she loved us, or because she wanted to hurt you? The honesty in her young eyes demanded a truthful answer. I think she was very confused and angry about some things that happened a long time ago, and she made choices that weren't about love at all. What I didn't tell them was that I was struggling with my own complex emotions about Cordelia's downfall. Part of me felt triumphant. She'd gotten exactly what she deserved. But another part grieved for the sister I'd thought I knew, the relationship I'd believed we had, the family connections that had been revealed as lies. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the family therapist David had recommended, helped me understand that these conflicted feelings were normal and healthy. You're mourning multiple losses, she explained. The sister you thought you knew, the father you never got to properly grieve because of the chaos she created, and the family structure you believed existed. It's okay to feel sad about those losses, while still being relieved that justice is being served. The practical implications of my sudden wealth were overwhelming in their own way. Financial advisors explained investment strategies and trust funds. Lawyers discussed tax implications and estate planning. Real estate agents called about mansions and vacation homes I could now afford. But what struck me most was how little my daily life needed to change. Luna and Nova were happy in their school, attached to their friends, comfortable in our neighborhood. Mrs. Vasquez had become like a grandmother to them, and our modest apartment felt more like home than any mansion ever could. Money doesn't have to change who you are, Patricia observed during one of our final meetings. Your father lived modestly by choice, even with all his wealth. You can do the same if that's what feels right for your family. The freedom wasn't in the money itself. It was in the security. It provided the knowledge that my daughters would never want for anything. The ability to make choices based on what was best for our family, rather than what we could afford. As Cordelia sat in federal prison awaiting trial, facing decades behind bars for her crimes, I was planning a much quieter future. College funds for the girls, a modest house with a yard where they could play, maybe some travel to show them the world their grandfather's hard work had made possible. Justice had been served, but the real victory was simpler than that. My family was safe, my daughters were home, and we could finally move forward without the weight of lies and betrayal crushing down on us. 1 year later, as I sat in the garden of our new home watching Luna and Nova chase butterflies between the rose bushes, it felt like we were living in a completely different universe from the nightmare Cordelia had created. The house wasn't a mansion. Just a comfortable 4-bedroom colonial in a good school district, with enough space for the girls to spread out and be kids. The legal proceedings had concluded 6 months earlier, with Cordelia receiving a 25-year federal sentence for fraud, identity theft, money laundering, and attempted kidnapping. She'd tried to plea bargain, offering to return assets in exchange for a reduced sentence, but the prosecutors were unmoved. The scope of her crimes and the viciousness of her attempt to steal my children had earned her the full weight of federal justice. I'd attended her sentencing not out of spite, but because I needed closure. When the judge asked if I wanted to make a victim impact statement, I'd spoken directly to my sister for the last time. "Cordelia, I hope someday you'll understand that Dad loved us both," I'd said, looking into her hollow eyes. "He would have been heartbroken to see what you became, what you were willing to do to your own family. But he also would have forgiven you, just like I'm trying to learn to forgive you now." She'd stared at me with something that might have been regret, or might have been hatred. I'd never know for sure, and I'd made peace with that uncertainty. The financial settlement had transformed our lives in ways both dramatic and subtle. The girls now attended Riverside Academy, a prestigious private school where their intelligence could flourish without the limitations of underfunded public education. They took piano lessons, art classes, and were learning French. Not because we were trying to be pretentious, but because they'd expressed interest and we could finally afford to nurture their curiosities. But the most important changes weren't about money at all. Mrs. Vasquez had moved into our guest house, officially becoming the grandmother the girls had never known. David Chen had become not just our lawyer, but a family friend who joined us for barbecues and birthday parties. Patricia Goldman stopped by regularly to check on us, having appointed herself our unofficial family protector. "You know what I love about you, Mija Mrs.?" Vasquez said one afternoon as we sat on the porch watching the girls play. "You got all that money, but you're still the same person. Still kind, still real. That's how you know someone has good character." The Marcus Whitmore Foundation, which I'd established in Dad's memory, was already making a difference in the community. We'd funded scholarships for single mothers returning to school, supported programs for children in foster care, and helped families dealing with financial emergencies. It felt like the most meaningful way to honor both my father's legacy and the lessons I'd learned from our ordeal. "Your dad would be proud," David had said when I'd shown him the foundation's first annual report. "You're using his wealth the way he would have wanted, to help people, to make a difference." The girls had adjusted to our new circumstances with the remarkable resilience of children, but they'd also gained a wisdom about family relationships that most kids their age never need. They understood that blood doesn't automatically make someone trustworthy, that real family is built on love and loyalty rather than genetics. "I'm glad Aunt Cordelia can't try to take us away anymore," Luna had said recently with the matter-of-fact tone she used for discussing serious topics. "But I'm also sad that she was so angry inside that she forgot how to be nice." Nova, ever the optimist, had added, "Maybe prison will help her remember how to be a better person." Their capacity for empathy, even towards someone who'd tried to hurt our family, reminded me daily that we'd not only survived Cordelia's betrayal, we'd emerged stronger and more compassionate than before. The story had become something of a cautionary tale in legal circles, frequently cited in cases involving family fraud and inheritance disputes. David regularly spoke at conferences about the importance of thorough estate documentation and the warning signs of financial elder abuse. But for me, the real lessons were more personal. I'd learned that trust should be earned rather than assumed, that financial security could provide peace of mind but couldn't replace genuine relationships, and that sometimes the people who hurt us most are fighting battles we never knew existed. I'd also learned the power of patience and strategic thinking. If I'd reacted emotionally to Cordelia's initial custody filing, If I'd confronted her directly about my suspicions, she might have destroyed evidence or fled the country with stolen assets. Sometimes the best revenge is simply allowing people to face the consequences of their own actions. The attempted kidnapping had been her fatal mistake, the moment when her desperation overwhelmed her cunning and revealed her true character to everyone watching. It was a reminder that people who build their lives on lies eventually destroy themselves through their own poor choices. As evening approached and we gathered around our dinner table, the same modest wooden table from our old apartment, because some things are worth keeping, I felt a contentment that no amount of money could have purchased. "What's your favorite thing about our new house?" I asked the girls as we shared stories from our day. "The garden," Nova said immediately. "And Mrs. V's cookies. The big closet where I can read without anyone bothering me," Luna added. "And that we're all still together." That last comment captured everything that mattered. We were still together, still a family, still connected by bonds that no amount of money or legal maneuvering could break. Looking back on that terrible period when Cordelia had tried to steal my children and destroy my life, I realized that her greatest failure wasn't the sloppiness that led to her exposure, or even the cruelty of her attempted kidnapping. Her greatest failure was never understanding what she was actually trying to steal. She'd thought she was fighting for money, status, and some twisted form of vindication. But what she'd really been trying to take was love. The love between a mother and her children. The love of a family built on honesty and mutual respect. The love that had sustained us through every challenge. You can't steal love. You can only earn it, nurture it, and protect it. And in the end, that's exactly what I'd done. Have you ever had to fight for your family against someone you trusted? Have you experienced that moment when you realized someone close to you wasn't who you thought they were? Drop a comment below sharing your thoughts on family, loyalty versus justice. I'd love to hear your perspective on this situation. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life drama stories. Share this with anyone who might need to hear that sometimes fighting back is the only way to protect what matters most. Thank you for being part of this journey with me, and remember, your real family is the people who stand by you when everything falls apart. Not just the ones who share your blood. Here's to choosing love over revenge, truth over comfort, and building the family you deserve rather than accepting the one that hurts you.